Hello, and thank you for coming along this evening. This evening, we're going to look at the overview effect and transition studies, learning about our place in space. The overview effect was, in fact, a term coined in the late 1960s, summarizing the impact that looking back at the Earth had upon the astronauts who first experienced it. Transition studies is inspired by the sense of finitude, finiteness that the overview effect impressed upon a lot of people, and the realization that we need now to go through a series of transitions to achieve a just and sustainable future on a finite planet. So we'll be looking at both the overview effect and transition studies in the weeks ahead and exploring the implications of each. First, then, we can ask what is meant by the overview effect. In fact, it's perhaps best experienced in total silence, in the same way that the astronauts first saw it. Consider the multiple meanings of the overview effect. Not only are there many people who now can experience it, but it has different meanings each time it is viewed. Of course, very few humans will ever go to the moon to begin with, and in fact, only a few have landed on the moon. Others have circled it, and multinational teams of astronauts have observed the moon from flyby contraptions, apparatus to circle the moon, as well as from space stations like the ISS, the International Space Station. But although only a few have ever gone to the moon and will ever go to the moon, all of humankind can now absorb and reflect upon the meaning of the overview effect and its impact in our own lives. Just the question of the overview of Earth is what is raised by the experience, and it's been made into a film, interviewing, among others, the astronauts who experienced it. The movie has been made, and it deserves to be widely viewed. The movie's director, Guy Reed, talked about the film at Harvard not long ago. Let's listen to what he said.
Good evening. The planet is in crisis. When we hear that, often our response is what and how? What can we do about it? How can we fix it? And these questions, while important, usually overwhelm the most profound and overlooked question. It's the question that discloses the root cause of our situation. Why? Why are we behaving in the way we are? It's the why that reveals our motivations. It's the why that reveals our intentions. And most importantly, it's the why that reveals our worldview. When astronauts look out the window, they don't see the economy. They barely see human society, vast as it is. They see the biosphere. They see the primary system. They see our primary reference point, the planet. So with this in mind, we understand that humans, us, we're a subsystem in the planetary system. And that in turn we've created another subsystem, human society, and in turn society has created another subsystem, the economy. Yet our primary reference point, the thing that our society holds most dear, tends to always be our economy, which in reality, according to our earth-gazing astronauts, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the biosphere. So there's something in this. It's not to say that the human constructs of society and our economy are not important or valuable. Of course they are. It's just that with this perspective, with this overview, we can begin to see the way things really are. Biosphere, society, economy. And actually, we've got it all upside down. Because we talk about the biosphere, this beautiful planet of ours, as a resource. But a resource of what? Well, it's the economy, stupid. So it appears that we've neglected that which is primary. One environmental philosopher, Joanne Macy, she refers to this as the great turning, the turning from an industrial growth society based on our economy being the primary reference point to a life-sustaining society based on our biosphere being our primary reference point. And we need to now start thinking about the latter. Planetary Collective was founded with this in mind: to find ways to point to what our actual situation is, to point to this non-apparent reality, using non-invasive, non-prescriptive techniques, one of them being film, in order to bring people back to the why. Why are we behaving like this? I loved dinosaurs when I was younger. I could name, well, I thought I could name all of them. I had dinosaur wallpaper, dinosaur pajamas, dinosaur lunchboxes. When Jurassic Park came out, well, it was rather exciting. And recently in graduate school, I bumped into my old friends, the dinosaurs, when I came across this concept of mass extinction. You know, during the life of our planet, we think there's been 5 mass extinctions. The last one being when my buddies, the dinosaurs, came to an end, when we think a comet hurtled towards the planet and hit the Yucatan Peninsula about 65 million years ago. But talking to some of my ecologist friends, they're seriously considering the question that we are in a mass extinction right now, the 6th mass extinction. And if you look at the increasing levels of biodiversity loss over the last few decades, it's quite sobering indeed. The only difference being that the cause of this mass extinction is not a 6-mile meteor. It's us. It's human civilization. It's our species. It's everyone in this room. We're not creating the conditions for life to flourish. We're doing precisely the opposite. And Planetary Collective, we believe that the cause of this is found in the way we see ourselves and our relationship to our world, our worldview. We see ourselves as separate from each other, from the biosphere, and from the very cosmos in which we abide. But this sense of separation is erroneous. It's a misperception. Einstein called it an optical illusion of consciousness. Even in our natural sciences, the study of phenomena is divided. Cosmological evolution, chemical evolution, biological evolution, human evolution. But it's not divided at all. It's a continuum. Life is a continuum. The universe is a continuum. Our very existence is a continuum. Which is actually the title of our upcoming feature documentary, featuring over 30 experts in the fields of cosmology, environmentalism, sustainability, and of course Ron Garan. We quickly realised that astronauts are the best spokesman for the reframing of our sense of who we are and what we're doing, simply because they're our modern-day heroes. They, in some respects, risk their lives. They venture into somewhere none of us have been, and they come back and they tell us, hey, we're all here together. And the planet, it's not as big as we thought. And there's nowhere else to go. Seriously. Oh, and by the way, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. So when we read about the overview effect, we got really excited because it's something that's actually accessible to everyone. And I think it's pointing to something far greater, something incredibly profound. That human beings have the capacity to directly perceive this non-apparent reality of our radical interdependence, not just with each other, but with the living earth, our mother, and the cosmos itself. And it starts to redefine what it means to be human at this time of awakening to our place in the universe, and how to relate to the world around us, and more importantly, how to relate to oneself. If we're inseparable from the earth as a whole, from the totality of life, then what are we exactly? Overview is the beginning of a series of films we're producing that point to this emerging worldview, a worldview that we believe is necessary for the emergence of a peaceful planetary culture, which is imperative not just for the survival of our own species, but for the survival of a countless number of species who are now inextricably bound to our own collective decision-making. We travelled the world making both films. In 18 months, we covered 100,000 miles. We went around the planet twice, literally. 50 cities, 20 countries. We met countless people. And one thing that strikes me, which is contrary to popular opinion, is people's basic goodness, people's basic sanity. We've been treated incredibly well. And I think a lot of it is when we tell people what we're doing. We're making a film about astronauts talking about how beautiful the planet looks like from space. Everyone we told was fascinated, whether they were Japanese, Mexican, Indonesian, Russian. They all looked at us and they all felt this deep recognition. I think it's in the potential lying dormant within human consciousness that affords a deeper perception of interdependence, that allows us to see the Earth as a single, whole, dynamic system. And really it's down to the brilliance and bravery of men and women who venture into space and come home and tell us this message. Men like Jeff Hoffman and Ron Garan, who I want to personally thank for being here today and for being in our film. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to watch it. So, no further delays, here is Overview.
That then was his introduction to viewing the film. Let's view an excerpt of the film and get a sense of what it's all about.
In 1968, Apollo 8 went to the moon. They didn't land, but they did circle the moon. And I was watching it on television, and at a certain point, one of the astronauts casually said, "We're going to turn the camera around and show you the Earth." And he did. And that was the first time I had ever seen the planet hanging in space like that. And it was profound.
I think that for me, like for many other people, it was quite a shock. I don't think any of us had any expectations about how it would give us such a different perspective. I think the focus had been, we're going to the stars, we're going to the other planets, and suddenly we look back at ourselves and it seems to imply a new kind of self-awareness.
One of the astronauts said, when we originally went to the moon, Our total focus was on the moon. We weren't thinking about looking back at the Earth. But now that we've done it, that may well have been the most important reason we went.
Oh, golly, I remember going through launch, which is an overwhelming experience. The engines cut off. I felt myself floating out of the seat. I floated over to the window, looked out, and we were coming up over the coast of Africa. And that's when it hit me. I'm in space. And, I just got incredibly excited because it's something I had dreamed about since I was 6 years old.
I think you start out with this idea of what it's going to be like. And then when you do finally look at the Earth for the first time, you're overwhelmed by how much more beautiful it really is when you see it for real. It's just like it's this dynamic, alive place that you see glowing all the time.
It was truly incredible to be up there doing what I always wanted to do my whole life, and then to kind of glance back at our planet and see that view was just tremendous.
I can only describe what I've seen. Looking down at the Earth and you see that line that separates day to night slowly moving across the planet. Thunderstorms on the horizon casting these long shadows as the sun sets. And then watching the Earth come alive, and you see the lights from the cities and the towns.
The events you see from space, like flying over thunderstorms, looking at them from the top, were spectacular. Like a fireworks show going on, and you're looking at it from the very top.
Shooting stars going below us, or dancing curtains of auroras. It's just very hard to describe all the colors, the beauty, the motion.
My job as lunar module pilot was to be responsible for the lunar module itself and responsible for the science on the moon. So when we started home, I had a little more time to look out the window than the other guys because most of my responsibilities were completed. We were in a particular mode called the barbecue mode. So we were flying like this and rotating like that. What that caused to happen was every 2 minutes, a picture of the Earth, the moon, the sun, and a 360-degree panorama of the heavens appeared in the spacecraft window. And I had studied astronomy, and I had studied cosmology, and fully understood that the molecules in my body, and the molecules my partner's bodies, and in the spacecraft, had been prototyped in some ancient generation stars. In other words, it was pretty obvious from those descriptions, we're stardust. Well, that was pretty awesome and powerful, particularly since I had a little more time at this point to be reflective and to think about it.
Awe, I think, is one of those words that you have a better understanding of once you see it, too. I felt like, using the word awesome was totally appropriate when it came to describing what the planet looks like.
To have that experience, awe is, at least for the moment, to let go of yourself, to transcend the sense of separation. So it's not just that they were experiencing something other than them, but that they were, at some very deep level, integrating, realizing their interconnectedness with that beautiful blue-green ball.
And this is why the astronauts, particularly in the International Space Station, often say that much of their free time is filled with what they call Earth gazing, just staring out at the Earth. They can stare for hours because the changing scenery, the interactivity of the biosphere, all of this has an incredible aesthetic impact.
the beauty of seeing Earth as a planet as opposed to being down here among it is a wonderful experience to then start to get into what we call the big picture effect or the overview effect.
I was flying cross country from the East Coast to the West Coast in the 1970s, and I was looking out the window, and as I was looking down at the planet, the thought came to me, anyone living in a space settlement or living on the moon would always have an overview. They would see things that we know, but we don't experience, which is that the Earth is one system, we're all part of that system, and that there is a certain unity and coherence to it all. And I immediately called it the overview effect.
You do, from that perspective, see the Earth as a planet. You see the sun as a star. We see the sun in the blue sky, but up there you see the sun in a black sky. So yeah, you are seeing it from a cosmic perspective.
We've been evolving from the beginning of civilization to a larger and larger perspective of life on the Earth. But the next natural evolution is understanding the life in space. That is, the fact that the Earth, as Buckminster Fuller used to famously say, is a spaceship Earth. We are in space already. It's just that we haven't brought that into our perspective as we live here on Earth. The overview effect is simply the sudden recognition that we live on a planet and all the implications that it brings to life on Earth.
When we look down at the Earth from space, we see this amazing, indescribably beautiful planet. It looks like a living, breathing organism, but it also, at the same time, looks extremely fragile.
Because you go outside on a clear day and it's the big blue sky and it's like it goes on forever, right? And how could we possibly, put enough stuff into it to fill it up with things that really change it? And yet you see it from space and it's this thin line which is just barely hugging the surface of the planet.
Anybody else who's ever gone to space says the same thing, because it really is striking and it's really sobering to see this paper-thin layer and to realize that that little paper-thin layer is all that protects every living thing on Earth from death, basically, from the harshness of space.
There's this very poetic concept that a lot of people express, that there are no boundaries from space. And I've heard a lot of my astronaut colleagues say that. Unfortunately, it's not true. You do see boundaries. They're mostly the result of human impact. You can see erosion, clear-cutting of forests, and it's a long litany of environmental impact that we've had on our planet, and that's something which, when you see it from a cosmic perspective, makes you really appreciate the concept of spaceship Earth, and that we're all here together.
After I came back and tried to understand what this experience was all about, I could find nothing in the science literature about it and nothing in the religious literature that I looked at. So I turned to the local university and asked them to help me with what I saw. And when they came back to me a few weeks later and said, well, in the ancient literature, we found a description called Salvakapa Samadhi. And they said that means that you see things as you see them with your eyes, but you experience them emotionally and viscerally, as with ecstasy and a sense of total unity and oneness. And I said, well, that's exactly what the experience was. And so it's rather clear to me as I study this, it wasn't anything new, but was something that was very important to the way we humans were put together.
Many of the great wisdom traditions of the Earth have pointed to what we're calling the overview effect. That is to say, they have realized this unity, this oneness of all life on Earth and of consciousness and awareness.
Within the Western tradition, I think it's quite new and quite shocking because there's been much more of a sense of separation. But if you look at other non-Western cultures, especially in Asia, the emphasis on those has always been on realization that the self and the world are not separate from each other, but that they're really interconnected, that the individual self and the species as a whole is a manifestation of the larger whole.
As you go into your mind in a contemplative way, the sense of the living reality of the planet becomes obvious. You become more in tune with the natural world. This is very akin to the direct perception that the astronauts have. So it's no wonder that many people have likened the overview effect to a spiritual or meditative experience, although it's not exactly that. It's a cognitive shift that very often can produce a kind of meditative experience.
I'm sure we all interpret it somewhat differently. I know some of the fellows go right to a religious explanation. I didn't. I went to more science explanation. And I think all that's wonderful. That's what it takes to build a civilization.
This view of the Earth from space, the whole Earth perspective, I think is the true symbol of this age. And I believe that what's going to happen is there's going to be a greater and greater interest in communicating this idea, because after all, it's key to our survival. We have to start acting as one species with one destiny. We are not going to survive if we don't do that.
We're seeing very clearly that if the Earth becomes sick, then we become sick. If the Earth dies, then we're going to die. People sense that something's wrong, but they're still struggling to go back and find out what the real roots of the problem are. And I think what we need to come to is a realization that it's not just fixing an economic or political system, but it's a basic worldview, a basic understanding of who we are that's at stake.
And a part of that is to come up with a new story, a new picture, a new way to approach this and to shift our behaviors in such a way that it leads to a sustainable approach to our civilization as opposed to a destructive approach.
It is a fragile planet, and if we don't take care of it and we don't work together, then we are going to have bigger issues than we have now down the road.
On a grand scale, that's, we're basically all living in this one ecosystem called Earth. And everything that you do on one side of the ecosystem affects the other side. And that is a new way for living for most of humanity.
We humans are responsible for ourselves, and if we are endangering our future, then we've got to learn how to do it differently and to go forward into a sustainable period. And right now, that seems very difficult to see how it's going to be, but we've got to work on it.
When I was above the space station, looking down at the space station, and looking down at the, against the Earth, and seeing this, amazing accomplishment, I was thinking, wow, there was 15 nations that worked together to build this amazing orbital complex in space. And if we can, take these 15 nations and do this amazing accomplishment, imagine what we can do by working together, by setting aside our differences for a common goal to overcome some of the challenges facing our planet.
We have this connection to Earth. I mean, it's our home. And I don't know how you can come back and not, in some way be changed. It may be subtle. You see differences in, different people in the just general response when they come back from space. But I think collectively, everybody has that emblazoned on their memories, the way the planet looks. You can't take that lightly. It really, you realize that you've been blessed by the opportunity to see that.
It really does look like this beautiful oasis out in the middle of nothingness. And if you have a chance for your eyes to adjust and you can actually see the stars in the Milky Way, it's this oasis against the backdrop of infinity, this just, enormous universe behind it. And it's, really a very moving experience to be able to see that with your eyes.
You look back at it and it's placed perfectly from the sun to take care of us. And you kind of take that reverse role on about, okay, well, we need to be taking care of it too, so that it can continue to do that for us. And I don't know how you can't have a greater appreciation for it after you see it that way.
Well, it's very impressive. And everyone can now share this overview and experience the overview effect. In fact, in the last 200 years, we've learned several things that are very important for our future as a human species. From biologists, we've learned that we are a part of nature, not apart from nature. We evolved here. We belong here. Moreover, we cannot survive elsewhere for very long. And when we do, it's only because on our spaceships we mimic the features and qualities of life on Earth. From the astronomers, cosmologists, and astronauts themselves, we've learned that we already live on the only life-supporting spaceship in the known universe. We did not create it. We cannot control it. We must not destroy it. This is what we mean by the overview effect and the implication for transition studies that it inspires. We've been learning about our place in space for the last 50 years, ever since we first landed on the moon. The overview effect has profoundly impacted the lives of the astronauts themselves and everyone else who has heard them talk about their experience. Transition studies are those studies involved in trying to move away from our current unsustainable forms of growth and habitation on the Earth's surface and move towards just and sustainable futures on this finite planet. We hope to be exploring the implications for human survival of transition studies in the weeks and months ahead. Already we've learned a great deal. The overview effect has radically altered our understanding of past civilizations. In effect, we've learned very quickly that we treat the soil like dirt. And topsoil is very rare, in fact non-existent anywhere else viewable in space. Soil is a living community. There's dust on the moon. There's dust on Mars, but there's no soil. And soil is necessary with all its millions of species of fungi, bacteria, and microbes that in effect nourish plants and make agriculture possible. All civilizations depend upon captured solar energy, captured by photosynthesis. We can now see that from space, and we can calculate why some civilizations collapsed very rapidly, because they mistreated their soils. Further, we can also see that the overview effect will radically change our concept of future human survival. We can see very quickly that there's a fatal consequence to the misplaced metaphor of treating agriculture as an industry, and with it, the delusion of infinite growth in a finite ecosystem. Corporations are predicated on the premise of continuous growth, but that can't happen in an ecosystem. Above all, the overview effect changes our assessment of some of our culture's most venerable institutions and our daily habits. We need to transcend the institutions we inherit and even those we create, especially in a time of climate change, where system change is going to be needed in the Anthropocene. Institutions, for example, like the Rhodes Trust and the legacy of all of the Rhodes Scholars needs to be re-examined if they are dedicated in their purpose and intent towards continuous, unlimited, unrestrained growth. Rhodes Scholars have taken on the motto of fighting the world's fight. But we all need to ask the question, what is the world's fight from the perspective of the overview effect? Is more, bigger, better a logic that we can survive with as a human community on a finite planet? These are some of the implications then of the overview effect and the need for transition studies to explore explicit transitions to a just and sustainable future on our finite planet.